Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us here at the Barnes& and Noble Midday Mystery Virtual Event. And I am Wanda M, and I'm the author. My most recent book is What You Leave Behind. And today I have the enviable pleasure of interviewing the uber talented Lou Berney. Lou, how are you, my friend?
I'm so glad to see you, Wanda. Thank you so much for doing this.
Same. Listen, for the folks who are not familiar with you, and I can't believe who they are, get that corrected right away. I'm going to read your bio real quick and then we'll get into it. All right. So, Lou Berney is the author of the novels Dark Ride, November Road, The Long and Faraway Gone, Whiplash River, and Gunshot Street. His books have won the Edgar, Hammett, Steel Dagger, Barry, McCavity, Lefty, and Anthony Awards. Phew. And he has been a finalist twice for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. His short fiction has appeared in publications such as The New Yorker, Plowshares, and the Pushcart Prize anthology. And Lou teaches at Oklahoma City University. Man, you are some kind of accomplished, and I am glad to call you my friend. So how have you been? How's the book
Well, first, I
going?
just want to say, first, I would like to say you're one of my favorite writers, so I'm especially honored to have you here today. So uh,
Oh,
I
thank you
love
for
your books.
that. I
Yeah.
love this mutual admiration society
Yeah.
going on here. So listen, I gotta tell you, I read Double Barrel Bluff in like a day and a half.
Oh,
And I
good.
think the only reason why it took me that long is because I have a kid and I need to sleep. But I
That's
was
why you need to send that kid to boarding school. What are you thinking?
all
Get
right,
him
so
out of
I can
here.
read more books.
Yeah.
I was like, this book was such a delicious pleasure. I thought, wow, how in the world does he keep doing this? So, for the people who haven't read the book yet, why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, Double Barrel Bluff is about a former getaway driver for the mob, for the Armenian mob in Los Angeles, who has been trying to go straight for quite some time and finally succeeded at going straight. And then, as in every good story, fate intervenes and he's forced to travel across the globe to help save his former boss and his ex-girlfriend in Cambodia. So it's one of those classic stories I wanted to write where you just when you settle down, life throws you a curveball and shakes everything up.
Yeah, I get that. And the protagonist in the story is Charles Samuel Sheikh Housham, who is returning to us after some time. I think we last saw him in Whiplash River,
Right,
right?
right.
Um, why did you decide to bring him back now?
Well, it's kind of a question. You know this too, Wanda. Like, when you write a series, you never want to repeat yourself. It's a real challenge because it's a series, so you want to come back with things that readers loved in the first books, but you
Mhm.
also want to do it in a fresh way. And for a while, I just didn't have a fresh idea for what his next adventure would be. And then my wife and I went to Cambodia and just on vacation and we were walking through this park and noticed all this fruit hanging from the branches of the trees. And we were like, oh, I wonder what that is. Is it some kind of mango? Is it an Asian pear? And then it started to squeak and the branches started to shake. And all of a sudden, thousands and thousands of bats started flying out of the trees. And we realized that's not fruit, that's bats. And to me, that captured like Cambodia, this sort of mystery beneath the surface. And it also captured what is good about a good story. Like, okay, you've got something that on the surface looks one way, but you dig deeper and it's something entirely different. So just from that, I got to bring Shake over here to Cambodia and get him involved in a murky underworld where he doesn't know who to trust and who's an enemy and who's a friend. And to me, I love that kind of book.
Yeah, indeed. That that just kind of the genesis of the story coming out of Cambodia is man like kismet because The setting for this book is so lush and dense and ominous all at the same time that, as I was reading it, I knew immediately, I was like, I don't know how, but Lou must have spent some time in
Mhm.
Cambodia because you have to be able to see the way you describe things in this book. And so, I can't tell you what my favorite thing about this book is, the setting, the characters, the plot, which is pitch perfect.
Thank
Um,
you.
but I keep coming back to those characters. Like you
Thank you.
have created an ensemble of the most interesting and God-forsaken people that have ever inhabited a book. And I just kept thinking, oh my goodness, I wouldn't trust the one of them, but I loved each one of them as
Oh,
well.
good.
Decron, and of course Shake, always Shake and Gina, but Decron and Ouch and Ramos and French and all of them kind of created this ensemble of kind of underbelly, bad news kind of stuff that I found so deliciously enthralling. I wanted to follow each character throughout the book. How
I
do you?
love this. I love this, by the way. And checks in the mail, Wanda. This is perfect. Thank you.
It's so very true. It's so very true. And the people out there who've already read this book will agree with me. I am not making up anything. As my 15-year-old son would say, no lies told. Okay.
Oh, I love that. No lies told. That's cool.
But how do you do that? How do you come up? How do you build this ensemble of characters that each one is unique in their own way? Like whenever a character popped up on the page, I knew exactly who was talking. I knew exactly what that character was about and their backstory. How do you go about doing that?
That's a great question. I mean, I think it starts for both of us. I think you do this too. It's like it starts with our love of characters. Like I don't think you can write good characters unless you love characters. And I love characters. Like it's the thing that gets me up in the morning and the thing that gets me through the day. It's just the more the merrier for me. And so like I'm always just open to any kind of character who starts to shine or come alive. So I think what happens in a lot of my books is I'll start writing a scene where there's just a very tiny minor character who's only going to supposed to be there for one paragraph or one beat. And if they say something interesting, I'll just follow that. I'll let them keep
Mm,
talking or I'll let them keep doing. And sometimes that leads nowhere, but sometimes a real character will blossom from that and they just sort of elbow their way, onto the page essentially. And to me, that's the happiest moment of writing is when a new character just sort of forces their way onto the page and says, "Hey, I'm here to stay."
yeah, I love that too. I remember in my first book, All Her Little Secrets,
Mhm.
writing a character who was just supposed to be like a friend of the protagonist's brother. And they kind of together, this is like his buddy, and they come over to the protagonist's house. And they're there for like 15 minutes and then leave. And this friend, the buddy friend of her brother, kind of entered the story. And I thought, the way he interacted with the protagonist,
Uh,
just absolutely loved. And so I wound up pitching that scene and writing him into the story. He was just going to show up in that one scene. And
I
I
love
thought,
that.
oh, he is so interesting.
Mhm.
And his dynamic with the protagonist is so good. And so that's the kind of stuff that when it happens as a writer, you go, ooh, I love it. Like it's a
Yeah,
good,
that's a great way to put it, that dynamic. You're always looking for that spark between characters, between all characters. And it could be a menacing spark, it could be a romantic spark, it could be a million different kinds of things, but you're always looking for that. And when it happens, to me, that's just like you got to capture that and run with it as fast as you can.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So in the book, I alluded to it earlier that a lot of the characters can't be trusted. The alliances in this book, this was also one of my favorite parts of the book, is that the alliances kept shifting
Mhm.
in this book. And so people that were trusting, people and saying, hey, buddy, we're partners, we're in this, all of a sudden It's like, whoa, wait a minute. Don't trust him. Don't do that. Did you know that going into the story as you were creating the story, or did those shifting alliances come across as the characters developed, as you started to write and figure out and flesh out who they were?
I think it's more the latter. I think I do a lot of outlining and a lot of planning and mapping, but that's mostly just to get me going. And then once the characters sort of hit their stride, I try to remain very open to new directions that the book goes. And so I think with the characters, the shifting alliances, I kind of had to see that on the page before I knew how things were going to shake out. And so I would say the last third of the book, I really didn't know how that was going to play out until I was actually writing the last third of the book. And again, I'm not a big fan, I'll admit, I'm not a big fan of twists in books that feel like they're kind of contrived or artificial or just a twist for the sake of a twist. I like surprises that come from the characters. And that's where that's when they're fun. And when you have characters who have different motives and different agendas and different desires, then the surprises kind of come from that. And that's what I love the most.
Yeah, yeah. I love it when it feels authentic. Like you read
Hmm.
it and you see it on the page and like, oh crap, I should have seen that coming. Or, oh man, that was smooth. I didn't see that coming, and you do that brilliantly. And particularly in this book, I just thought, oh yeah, yeah. Something bad is gonna happen, but I don't know what it is. And I love that. I love that. So, again, as I indicated earlier, I am wearing a pink velour tracksuit.
Yes, you are.
So, for those of you who have read the book, you know that this figures prominently for one of the characters. If you haven't read it yet, I'll leave it as a sweet treat for you to find out when you read the book. But I just love all those characters. So enough about my ranting on, because I always like to get like wisdom and brilliance from you whenever we sit down to talk. But this time I will defer to all the wonderful readers and the people in the audience who have joined us. So they've sent in a lot of really great questions
Oh, good.
that I want to share with you. I will try to get to any questions that you might be able to put in the chat, but let's see what we can get through now. So let's see. From
Nothing
Lori.
personal. Nothing personal. I'm not revealing
Nothing
anything about
personal.
my personal life.
Nothing
None of it.
personal. Never
All right.
personal. That's right. Never personal. So, who was your first girlfriend? No,
Uh,
just,
that was good. That was good timing. I fell for that.
I'm
What
just
are
kidding.
you talking about?
No.
I totally fell for that. So you can't trust anybody.
Gotcha.
Ah.
So, Lori wants to know, what does your writing schedule typically look like?
Typically, I get up pretty early and I write 3 hours in the morning. I
Mhm.
eat lunch, take a nap, and write about 2 to 3 hours in the afternoon. And but the one thing I will say is sometimes it's not always drafting. Like sometimes when I talk about writing, I talk about that could be brainstorming, that could
Mhm.
be mapping or outlining, it can be revising. So if I ever get stuck on one particular part of the process, I just shift to another part. So if I get stuck brainstorming, I'll shift to writing, actual drafting the scene. So about 5, 6 hours a day. But again, it can depend on which part of the process I'm on.
Right.
And then
One
I
of the
and then I will add one thing. If I ever have a real problem that I'm dealing with, I take my
Mhm.
dog for an extra walk. And a lot of
Oh,
times that's the quickest way for me to like solve a story problem is by just being outside with my dog, kind of away from the keyboard and that helps a lot sometimes.
yeah, yeah, I get that. I totally do that too. One of the things you said that I think is very important for any writers who are out there and listening to us is that your writing day is just not encompassed by writing words, like you alluded to, like brainstorming, outlining, if you're an
Mhm.
outliner, all those things. I always tell writers that that's all part and parcel of it, right? Even just sitting out on your back porch and kind of thinking through a plot knot or thinking through how a scene will unfold, that's all to me part of the writing process.
Exactly. I 100% agree. It just takes so much pressure off you. If you think you have to be writing
Yeah.
words 6 hours a day, That's that for some writers that might work, but that doesn't work well for a lot of writers, and you just have to see the whole process as a whole, I think.
I agree. I agree
Yeah.
totally. All right, so let's see. There's a question here from Aaron. How long did it take you to finish Double Barrel Bluff? And how long does it typically take you to finish writing a book?
Well, that really depends on the book because I write kind of different kinds of books. Like I would say, like the Sheikh Bushan books, of which Double Barrel Bluff is the third, are kind of relatively lighthearted, fun, fast, escapist, enjoyable, both to read and to write. And
Mhm.
so those go faster. That takes me about a year to write those books, I would say. Maybe a year and a half because I'm kind of slow. But the other books I've written, like November Road and Dark Ride and Long and Far Away Gone, those take longer. Those take maybe 2.5 years, just
Mhm.
because there's more going on. There's more kind of texture to them emotionally. And I tend to be in everything I write, I'm a trial and error kind of writer. So I'll try out a lot of stuff that I end up throwing away. So I'm not as fast as other writers who, I'm envious of someone who can just sit down and get it right the first time, but I'm not that way at all. Like I throw away a lot of bad stuff and some good stuff too that just doesn't fit. I mean, we all do that, I think.
Yeah. I was recently on a panel with Michael Connolly, and someone asked him, how long does it take you to write a book? And he goes, oh, like 3 or 4 months. And it's like,
That
what?
bastard. I know. I love Michael Connell. His stuff is
I
so
do
good,
too.
but I don't have that gift. So,
I don't either. I don't either. And the thing that I find too is that when I'm writing a book, like I'll start out with some stories,
mhm,
idea in my head. But the more I write the book, the more that idea grows or changes or
mhm.
evolves. And so, I couldn't write a book in a short period of time because I just need kind of the thinking time to get that idea pulled through and fully fleshed, if that makes any
Yeah,
sense.
that's another thing I think writers who are just starting out, and even writers who are been around for a while, need to remember is that it like that thinking part is part of the process of just sort of letting things simmer on the back burner. That's really useful and can be the
Yeah.
difference between something that's pretty good and something that's pretty great.
Yep. I agree. I agree. So let's see what else we have. Oh, this is a great question from Robin. Why do you choose to write in this genre?
Well, that's interesting. That's a good question too. I
Hmm.
started out writing, I guess, general fiction. So, because my first book was a collection of short stories that were just general fiction or literary fiction or whatever you want to call it. And then I got into crime fiction. I've always loved to read crime fiction, but I
Hmm.
think the bigger picture for me is that it's a genre that's so enormous and so
Hmm.
welcoming to different approaches. Like
Yeah.
you and I know, like there's so many different kinds of crime fiction. Like you really can do whatever you want in this genre and
Yeah.
still be able to rely on certain conventions as a foundation, but then go off in really interesting, fun, fresh directions. So for me, it's like I love the idea of having the guardrails of a genre, but then also the freedom of completely ignoring them at times. And I think you can
Yeah.
do that with crime fiction.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. The whole idea of, melding different genres within this genre too is always kind of exciting, I
Yeah, one
think.
of the things you talked about character, and like one of the cool things for me about characters, I take a character I've seen a lot of, and then I just try to do something different with them. Like
Yeah.
it makes it easy and then come up with something out of whole cloth. I'll say like, okay, here's a PI. I've seen all these cliches about PIs. What can I do to make this different and
Mhm.
fresher? And that's a fun way to work.
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea. Um, this question is from Pras. How do you decide if an idea is good enough to be turned into a novel?
Oh, long periods of agonizing, I would say. Lots of painful agonizing. Like I am really bad. I have friends, and maybe you're like this. We've never talked about this specific thing, Wanda, but I think I have friends who have like suitcases full of good ideas for books. And I do
Yes.
not. I have two ideas at a time, and then I can't ever decide between them, and I lay awake at night, and so it's agonizing. But finally, I just sort of have to let it think on it, think on it for a
Mhm.
long, long time. And it's like cooking brisket or something. It's got to cook, and you got to pay it. You got to go out there at 3 a.m. and stare at it to make sure the temperature is just right. And finally, you're like, okay, that idea will work, I think.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? I have like a whole folder of ideas, but when it's time for me to write something, I go back and I look at it and I'm like, oh my gosh, who would want to read this, right? Stuff
Right.
is so entirely dark.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, right. Or there's the one where you're like, oh, that's a great idea. That will only take me 17 years to write this, because it involves like 8 years of research and like, I want to skip that
Exactly.
one. Yeah.
Exactly. It's just like, I don't know if that's going to work out so well.
Yeah.
Um, Helen wants to know, excuse me, do you know how a book is going to end before you start it? And how chronological is your writing process?
I would say that like I'm usually uncertain how a book will end. Like I will say with most of my books, I really didn't know how they were going to end. I kind of knew where they were going to arrive right before the end, but I didn't
Yeah.
know how that was going to play out. And
Mhm.
so again, I think it's really hard to know that in advance if you haven't already lived with the characters and seen the plot that develops and see what new characters come in and new twists and turns. And but that said, I do write fairly chronologically. Every
Mhm.
now and then I'll go back if I have a big change, and I'll go back and remap, replan, re-outline, rewrite. But a lot of times it's just sort of creeping through and sort of
Yeah.
telling the story to myself in a way, or discovering the story as it's happening, I think.
Yeah, yeah. For me, my stories, it's almost like they play in a loop in my head. And so I kind of see this kind of movie, like scenes. I'll
Yeah.
see, scenes, and I'm like, oh, I need to kind of write this down. Which is why once I finish a book, I kind of look over the whole map of it and I'm like, oh, that movie played really out of order,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Because you want to make sure that you create tension and suspense. And so sometimes they aren't always in order
Right,
that
right.
way. Yeah.
Yeah. What about anywhere you run? Like, what about that? That's one of my favorite books of yours. And I was just like wondering, like, that seems like a very chronological, like you're following that movie. But is that how you did that one?
Yeah, thank you for that. First of all, yeah, Anywhere You Run, which was set in 1964, about two sisters who are running from a really dangerous man, and they go to different parts of the country. That book really did kind of run the way I like wrote it the way it
Uh-huh.
played out. And it was in three different points of view too.
Right.
So with the two sisters plus the bad guy who was chasing them. And, for me, I would get to a point where I was like, oh yeah, we need to check in with Mercer, the bad guy. Or,
Hmm.
I need to see what's going on with, Miracle or what have you. But like you, I tend to write very chronologically the way it happens
Hmm.
is kind of the way I write the story. I've never been one where I could say, okay, I'm only going to write this point of view or I'm only going to write this timeline. I can't do that. I have to watch the
Yeah.
movie in my head.
I totally get that. And it's funny about the multiple points of view. That's the one thing that gets tricky because you're
Hmm.
always trying to like line up the right timelines for each perspective and how they intersect. And that's a real fun thing to do, but it also can be really a pain sometimes to try to like juggle all that and figure out where everything fits.
Yeah, truly, truly. Um, Here's an interesting one from Leanna. She wants to know, what is your interesting writing quirk?
Oh, wow. Do I have a quirk? I must have a quirk. Let me think. Oh, okay. Well, my wife whose office is next door to mine, she claims without any proof whatsoever that I read dialogue out loud as I'm writing it. And I don't know I'm doing that, but she says like I say all the dialogue as I'm writing it. So that may be a quirk or it may just be my wife playing with my head. I don't know. It's one of the two.
I believe that because I find that your dialogue is also pitch perfect.
Oh,
Like
thank
it
you.
is, no, it really is because you don't give too much, you don't give too little. People are talking, and I'm following the conversation, but people are also not saying stuff that they really, like how people talk, but they're not saying things that you think, oh, they've left something out. What's going on here? Particularly in this book, the dialogue between Gina and Shake. I was loving it. I was
Oh,
eating
good.
up because she is so sassy. And he's like, look, I'm just trying to do this thing. Like, woman, help, and she is just like, oh, and she's just so sassy. And I love, love, love the dialogue between them. I also love the dialogue between Ouch and Shake, where like again, those alliances change. And I listened to a portion of the book on audio. When I'm in the car driving, I would switch from the heart, the
Mhm.
paper book to the audio. And man, the actor was phenomenal for
Yeah,
that.
that's Jonathan McLean. He's done
Oh,
several of my books. He's phenomenal. Yeah, that he
he
can
is
do that.
really,
Yeah,
really good. It was just, he had the accents down without it sounding cartoonish or cliche.
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
Perfect. It was
yeah,
perfect.
yeah.
I love
Jonathan McLean is his name, and he is a wonderful performer
mhm.
of audiobooks. Like he's terrific. That makes such a
Yes,
difference when you have a good narrator, I think.
yeah, he's great. Here's a question from Bridget. What do you love most about the world of mystery and suspense and darkness?
Wow, that's deep, Bridget.
Hmm.
Um, wow, it's kind of deep for mid-afternoon. Let me think here. I think I think by get let me try this out. I think we're both this way. That's why we're such good friends, I think, in some ways, and such simpatico writers. Is I think we're attracted to the darkness of things, but we also want to see a glimmer of light in there as
Mm,
well. And so to me, like the darker things can get, the brighter the light will seem. And so to me,
mhm.
like this kind of crime fiction, mystery suspense, it's just a really nice way to balance a look at the world, seeing it for what it is. It's not a kind place in a lot of ways. It's a hard place, but it's got some glimmer to it as well. And I like to try to capture that as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's why, like both of our books, they deal with really dark issues, but they also have humor, which
Hmm.
provides that glimmer, as you
Hmm.
say. I'm sometimes always grappling with how does one human being do such awful things to another
Hmm.
human being? How does that happen in the world? Um, and how do you not fall into despair around it, which is that glimmer that I think, you talk about that we both bring into the books.
Right.
Either through humor. I also add a little romance, much like you, but something that says that there's still good in the world in the midst of all this rancor and ugliness.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that like just has to keep us afloat as human beings sometimes is this idea that, it's there's something here too that's there's always something good to focus on.
Yeah,
But it's complicated. It's not
but it's
neat.
complicated.
Yeah, you can't just say like, oh, it's going to be a happy ending. It's maybe not going to be a happy ending, but it's going to be a complicated ending maybe.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. It is complicated. It's very complicated. Allison asks, did this story change from an original idea?
Let me think. That's a good, yeah, I think originally with this story, I always had the idea that it was going to be a kidnapping gone wrong. In other words, I
Mhm,
love the trope of bad guys rob the wrong guy. Like that's in a lot of movies where, a bunch of low-level robbers accidentally rob the big mob guy. And now they're like, oh, damn, we're in trouble. So here I kind of always wanted to have two sort of two kind of clumsy kidnappers kidnap someone they thought was a tourist, but turns out to be a very dangerous person with very dangerous allies. So that's always been at the core of things. How that played out changed a lot over the course of, who she was and how that was going to end up getting resolved. It became much more, I would say, psychological than it
Mhm.
originally. Originally, I was just thinking of it as sort of a plot caper, but then I got to play with sort of the characters and their minds and their psychological approaches, and so that developed in a way that was kind of interesting to me.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question that I just thought of while you were talking. How do you or do you do any research, but how do you write such really good female characters that don't appear like caricatures?
Mm,
Like Alexandra Alandrian is a complicated character, no doubt. Uh, but much like Gina and Mitch, oh my gosh, Mitch is one of my favorite characters
oh,
too.
thank you.
Um, you know, these are women who are different and complicated and complex, and you write them in a way that they don't come off looking like caricatures or tropes. Like I was all in on Mitch. I was
Oh,
like,
good, good, good.
maybe I've got an aura. It's like how do you do that? Do you talk to people? Does your wife give you input? How does that come about?
I mean, I think I was really fortunate to have a very strong mother and two older sisters. So I always had a strong
Mhm.
female presence in my life. And then I've been married for almost 30 some years. And so my wife has been an incredible influence on me on just the way of looking at women and the way to look at the world. And so, I just think that was been the best gift I could have got is just being around really strong and having friends, women writers who are very strong. Like I have close friends who are women. So I think it's that, and it's just a question of accepting the fact that women are humans too, right? It's like, sounds
Yeah,
like a little thing, but like I just try to make sure every character kind of is fully developed. And I try to watch myself and make sure I'm not falling back into any of the prejudices
hmm,
or ways of thinking that I might have grown up with. You know what I mean? Like I just try to be
right.
hyper vigilant about certain things. It has to do with people from foreign countries. It has to do with race. It has to do with gender. A lot of things
Right.
you just sort of, I try to catch myself. And I'm sure I miss a lot, but at least I'm aware that I'm liable if I'm not careful to make those kind of mistakes. And I feel like that's the first step, probably.
Yeah. I you know, writers can write whomever they want to write. But my eye is always a little keener when, a
Mhm.
guy is writing a female and I'm like, did he get that right? Like, but with your female characters, I'm always like, oh yeah, like, yeah.
I love hearing that because I'm the same. I mean, partly was like every book I think about this question, like, should I even be writing in a female point of view? And
Mm,
so I
right.
have this debate every time. And I'm like, every time so far I've come out on the side of like, it's just too much. I'm being given up too much if I wasn't able to do that. And so it might be a selfish reason, but it makes me work even harder to try to like do justice to those characters, I guess. But
Right.
I agree with you. I mean, there are certain characters I won't write in their point of view because I feel like it's a form of colonization, in a way.
Yeah.
Like there's people who there's certain kind of historically marginalized groups that have their own writers who need to tell their story. So it's kind of the same with women too. So it's one of those debates I constantly have with myself.
Yeah. Yeah, I love hearing that. I love hearing that. And I'm the same too. Particularly when I'm writing male characters, I'm like, am I doing this justice?
Your male
My
characters are great. Your male characters are
oh,
terrific, by the way. But
thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I thought long and hard. And I remember writing a barbershop scene with these two 70-something characters, male characters. And it was like, I know absolutely nothing about like 70-something-year-old men, and I've probably been in a barbershop maybe 3 times in my life. Um, but I tapped into people that I did know like that,
Yeah.
right? I have
Yeah.
uncles, I have a dad,
Yeah. Right. Right.
and they're real people, and they say stuff and they do stuff, and I'm like, yeah, this is what I would want to see in a character in a book. But yeah, I should have known you had like a strong female influence in your life because your female characters are really, really great.
Oh, thank you
Um,
so much. I really appreciate that.
it's true. Excuse me. Tammy wants to know, where do you get the ideas for your stories and books?
Well, it depends. Like I would say, like again, as I mentioned, I don't have many ideas. They're very far and few and far between. But they come from different places. A lot of I would say in general, they always start from one very tiny little seed of something. Like it's a character, or it's a premise, or it's an idea, or it's a feeling. I never have ideas come to me fully formed. It's always the start
Yeah.
of something tiny, and then I sort of coax it into being a little bit, I think. So, yeah, a lot of times it's just a lot of just a feeling. Like I just kind of feel like this would make a good story. I'd want to read this story, and that's kind of where it comes from. That's a terrible answer. I feel like I don't know how
It's,
to answer that. I wish I
it's
had a better answer for that.
It's truthful. Your books particularly this one, that whole Cambodian setting is so intense and so realistic. Um, how much, I know you and your wife took the trip there, but how much research goes into your books? Like, you took a vacation there. Did you vacation there knowing, oh yeah, I'm going to write this book?
No, I didn't know at the time. So
But did you have to go back and do additional research? What was that like?
I did a little bit of additional research, but the good thing about this book was I was writing from the point of view of an outsider. So like Sheikh is coming into this world, you know, blank canvas. Like he's never been here, he doesn't know anything about it. So that made it easier to write about Cambodia because I didn't have to do a ton of research because I'm just like Sheikh. I'm just coming in, a brand new soul on this continent. So I didn't have to know anything more than he would know. So that made it easier. But I wrote another book called November Road, which is set in 1963, and I was
I
born
love that
after
book,
that.
by the way.
Thank you so much.
That's my favorite book of yours.
Oh, thank you so much. But as you know, yours was set in 64, right?
64, yeah.
Yeah. So like that was before both of our times. So
Yep.
we really had to understand it from the inside out. And that
Yeah.
required a lot more research because I couldn't just fake it. Like I couldn't have a time traveler popping into 1963. I had to like have characters who spoke the language, who moved that way, who thought that way. And so that took a lot more research, that kind of book.
Yeah, yeah, I get that. I remember in Anywhere You Run, the book that's set in 1964, my characters make a lot of collect phone calls. And I was explaining this to my 15-year-old son, and he's like, "What's a collect phone call?" Right?
Right, right, exactly.
Yeah, it did
Uh,
require a lot of research. It did require a lot of research. Um, and let's see. Oh, here's an interesting question from Kathy. She wants to know, what books did you read as a child?
oh, that's a great question.
Mhm.
I read constantly as a kid. My mom worked, my dad and mom both worked, so I was on my own a lot. And so I spent hours and hours in the library, just pulling the books off the shelf, reading an entire book during the day at the library. Some of the books I loved, I read, there's a series of books called The Happy Hollisters, and they were kind of a knockoff of the Bobbsey twins and Nancy Drew. They were a family of 6 kids who solved crimes in different places across the world. And so I read all those, and clearly it influenced me a lot because with these books, I'm always going somewhere different in the world. But I read The Happy Hollisters, which hardly anybody's ever heard of, which bums me out because
Unfortunately, I haven't.
it's all right. They just weren't as popular as the Bobbsey twins or Nancy Drew, but I loved them. The Hardy Boys, that was another one. But I loved the Happy Hollisters. And then I would just read anything my 2 older sisters gave me. They loved to play school with me, so they'd be like, "Oh, here's your homework. here this summer day, and I'd be like, okay. So I'd read whatever they gave me. So I read a lot of everything, really. That's why I think I still love to read all kinds of books, not just crime, but any kind of fiction. I'll just devour it.
Oh, that's so funny. That's something else we share in common, Lou. I used to love to play school when I
Oh,
was little.
really?
Yeah, but I would only play with kids who would let me be the teacher.
Oh, that's interesting. You're like one of my
I always
sisters
wanted
then.
to.
Yeah, yeah. All right. I
I don't know
see
if I
you.
could play with your sisters because they would want to be the
That's
teachers.
right. That's right. They both became teachers, so I was good practice for them.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Um, Cheryl wants to know, what are you reading currently, and what authors inspire you?
Oh man. Um, the a writer who I really love so much, and I always say is Kate Atkinson. She is a
Mm,
British author who writes both a PI series that's very dark but has some humor in it, and she
yeah,
also writes historical standalones. And she's the first writer I kind of read many years ago, and I was like, I want to do something like that. And
yeah.
so that's Kate Atkinson's the writer I really, really been inspired by. Um, I'm working on a project right now, a TV project with Walter Mosley, the great Walter Mosley. So he's
Mhm.
another of my favorite writers. Like in terms of crime, the guy, like he basically helped invent the genre, and so and he's still doing fantastic work. So that's another writer, Walter Mosley, that I just adore and been inspired a lot by.
Yeah, same here. He is just phenomenal. And if you ever hear him speak about writing at a panel or so, it's like sitting at the master's feet, right?
Ooh, I
Right,
know. I
exactly.
know.
He says stuff, and I'm like, oh my gosh,
I
right?
know. He has two books on writing that are two of the best books on writing I've ever read. He's
I
phenomenal.
got him
You
back
got
here
them?
behind.
Yep.
Yeah.
They're
Yep.
fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, he is wonderfully, wonderfully, incredibly brilliant in this whole, genre of crime fiction. I
Yeah.
couldn't agree more. So here's a question that I always love. Jessica wants to know, what is the best advice you have ever received?
Ooh, these are such good questions.
They are. I'm telling you, these are great questions.
Well, one thing I will say this, I had a teacher, a fiction teacher, who every time I gave him a story, he would write cut 7 pages and send it out. And even if it was like a 4 page story, that was his mantra, cut 7 pages and send it out. So it was just shorthand for making things as tight and as lean as possible. And so I love that about good fiction, where, it can be rich and dense, but like I don't like wasting time or words. I just like being as direct as possible. So that's one piece of good advice. Another one I don't even remember where I read this piece of advice, but it was basically saying, figure out what you do, what only you do well, and do that thing. And it was
Ooh,
kind of good for me to hear at a time in my life where I was kind of trying to be other people. I was like, I'd read a book by Walter Mosley, or I'd read a book by Flannery O'Connor, and I'd be like, oh, I got to write like that. But
mhm.
really, it's about figuring out, like, what's the one thing that I do that no one else does, and then do that as well as you can. And I think that's like good advice for any writer at any stage of their career.
Yeah, that's a really good piece of advice. You know, it's hard though sometimes, and I tell writers this, that you'll get, particularly if you're unpublished, you will get people telling you, always do this, always do that, and you can't do that. Like, you have to
No.
figure out what works for you. Um, and so, and I remember when I was unpublished and I didn't have an agent. And for example, people, I do workshops or I go to, some course, and the instructor would always say, never use a prologue, never write prologues, because editors and agents won't read them. And it's just throat clearing before you get to chapter one. And Lou, all three of my books have a prologue.
Yeah, I got prologues too. Of course, that's terrible
Exactly.
advice.
Exactly. And
Yeah,
so that's why I tell people, you have to figure out what works for you. And that advice you give is figure out that one thing that you do really well, whether it's characters or dialogue or
Yeah.
setting, whatever it is such great advice because you can
I
get,
love that though. Yeah, I mean, I just love what you're saying about like be careful the advice you get because it may not be right for you. So that's
it
such a
may not
smart
be
thing.
right at all. Yeah. So listen, Lou, this has been an absolute joy. It's always a joy when I sit down
It's
and I
such a pleasure.
because I
I
always
owe you
feel
a
like
fancy dinner
naturally.
now. I owe you like you're gonna get a lobster, whatever you want. Steak.
That is so not necessary. It's just always a treat for me to talk to you. As I've told people, you are like one of the nicest people in crime fiction.
Just to
And
you, not
good.
to other people. I'm just nice to you because I like you so much and I love your work. But I'm mean
Thank
to
you.
everybody else. So, no, but thank you so much. It was been such an honor to get have a conversation with you. I love it. So
Same here. So listen, everyone out there, if you purchased your ticket and it includes Lou Berney's latest book, Double Barrel Bluff, which I have my copy right here. I love the cover too, by the way.
oh, thank you.
Notice, I don't know if you noticed, but whenever I read your books, I always like mark pages because I
Oh, I
always
love that. That's so
that's
good.
really good. And I'm like, that's a great line. Oh, I like how he did that.
That's
Um,
awesome.
but anyway, if your ticket included Double Barrel Bluff as part of your ticket purchase, your book should be coming within 8 to 10 days. If you did not purchase Lou's book, get on top of that right now. You can purchase at barnesandnoble.com 24/7. So get after it.
And if you buy one of Wanda's and one of mine at the same time, an angel will get his or her wings, is what I've heard. It's the rumor.
I love it. That's what I heard too. That's what I heard too. Lou, all the best. Much success on this new book. I know you're knocking it out the park, so I'm not even worried.
Thanks, and
Thank
good luck
you.
on your new one. And I hope to see you real soon, Wanda.
Same here. All right. Take care, folks.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
so
joining.
much, Wanda. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.